Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here to talk about MSU's new athletic director, J Batt. Before we start, we'd like to personally thank all the supporters of the show, especially Patreon supporters at the Mateen Cleaves level: Bill Church, Brian O'Donnell, Michael Bosnick, Chad Hickey, Mike Huntoon, Scott Driscoll; Draymond Green supporters: Adam Walzak, Dan Rankin, James Benton, Jim L., David Brame, Paul Marsh, Doug Robinson, Daniel Dranak, and all the Scott Scout supporters on Patreon, as well as Rich Wagenheim, Kenneth Cremett, Roger Bronstick, Al, Michael Emmerich, and Joe and VT on Substack. If you want to support all these awesome this show and join all those awesome people, head on over to our support page at tffinots.com/support to get the necessary links. Okay, Rod. So as most of our listeners know, the previous AD, Allan Haller, was let go recently. MSU just announced a new AD they got out of the portal, J Batt from Georgia Tech. Batt has been running Tech since looks like 2022. And his previous stint before that was Alabama, where he's somewhat famously was involved in the hiring of Nate Oates to the basketball program. But why don't we start with the reasons Haller was let go to lay the groundwork of what Batt's brought in to fix?
Well, my understanding is that Allan Haller had problems adjusting to, well, let's call them the fiscal realities of modern day athletics, which really means NIL and interaction and an effective and organized system with donors.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been most profoundly felt on the football side.
Right.
And that was pretty clear. I mean, you saw Michigan State last season, for example, lose a couple of defensive linemen, one of whom ended up going in the first round in this year's NFL draft, Derek Harmon. And my understanding of that, both of those situations, was that was primarily about money.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to understand because Michigan State, as an athletic department, as an athletic program, my my view has always been that it was better set up than most in terms of major donors. But there's a couple of things that are worth keeping in mind. One is that uh, you have to have the right kind of relationships with those major donors, and I think it's like anything else. People who have power and who have resources, some of them, certainly not all, but some of them can have egos. And
Sure.
so managing that, it's the same as in any institution where you've got a lot of very significant, and I'll use horrible business vernacular that I despise, but it makes sense here, stakeholders.
Yeah. Right.
Um, where you've got a lot of very powerful stakeholders, you have to be able to navigate that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing is that Michigan State was not very well organized in terms of accessing donors below the elite level. So not the Matt Ishbias, the Greg Williamses, these names that you might hear bandied about from time to time, but the kind of the average people, the
Yeah.
yous and the me's and most of our listeners, you know, who might be willing to give, a few $100s or even a couple of grand a year if they felt like there was a return on that investment. And that doesn't mean a financial return. It means that you can see where the money is going and it's clearly helping Michigan State athletics succeed. And
Right.
that has been lacking. I think if you talk to just about anybody, they'll tell you that that has been lacking. And I think, at least what I've gathered, Allan Haller was very much focused on revenue sharing, which people will tell you is going to come in the aftermath of the House settlement, the House case settlement, which still
Right.
hasn't been. We still don't have an approval of the settlement by the judge, and they've been talking about this being any second now for at least 2 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Um, Newsflash: even if the judge does approve the settlement, that's not going to solve anything. But
Mm-hmm.
Allan Haller apparently, from what I understand, really believed that that was coming down the pike quickly, and that that was going to bring us back to, in some ways, to something closer to what we had pre NIL, that that stuff wouldn't matter as much. I think I think there was some I don't know. I don't know. I can't speak to whether, who he was listening to, whether
Yeah.
he had the right people, the wrong people in his ear, whatever it was, but that was a problem because, to no one's, at least no one reasonable shock, this thing has dragged on and on and on. So what we've had are several years now of a total Wild West. And if you don't have your ducks in a row and you don't have organization put into place for how you're going to function in this environment, which really means getting the most money you possibly can,
Yeah.
to deploy on behalf of retaining talent or obtaining new talent, you're going to fall behind. And that's really the perception, and I think from what I know it's correct about Michigan State football. Now, that has not been the case in terms of, clearly, in terms of Michigan State basketball or Michigan State hockey. And I
Right.
think hockey is a plus revenue sport. I'm not positive of that,
Probably barely if it is.
but barely maybe. But let's just stick with the other one, which is basketball,
Hmm.
and the one that we talk about all the time. Basketball, whatever you want to say about it, has continued to produce during this era. Um, and we can talk about all the ways in which Michigan State does not approach this the way the way most schools do in basketball. But be that as it may, it has still been very successful. We're coming off a Big Ten season where they lapped the field, an Elite Eight finish in the tournament. Hard to argue that Michigan State has just been put way, way, way behind the field in
Right.
terms of where it stands as a basketball program. And I know there are probably some listening to this that disagree vehemently with the way Tom Izzo plays it, but and we'll probably turn back to this in a bit, but I don't think Tom Izzo is going to change very much in terms of how he operates, no matter what happens, as a
Right.
result of the new AD and
Yeah.
a new approach to fundraising and finances and all the rest. I don't see a lot of that changing, but we can come back to that later. So I think that's why Allan Haller was separated from his job, and I think I said at the time, here, I don't feel great about that. I mean, Allan Haller is a Spartan. He's one of ours. He's
Yeah.
a graduate of Lansing Sexton, played football and ran track at Michigan State. He worked as a public safety officer at Michigan State before getting into the athletic department. I don't like that that's how it went. I understand that from everything I've heard from reasonable people, it seems to have been a situation where there wasn't really a choice. So I understand it, but I don't like the circumstances that led to it. But that's a separate issue from where we are today, because it seems that, absent, taking it out of the context of, feeling about a fellow Spartan and a Lansing guy and all of that, it seems like it had to happen. So that's how we got here. I think is it really was a failure to organize and engage with this, put into place a system that could effectively and efficiently deal with what has become a new reality in college
Yeah. Right.
athletics.
Yeah, I guess you could kind of argue there are two sort of one aspects. One of them is, as you're alluding to, is sort of a strategic mistake in the sense that expecting a different solution to the funding issue, and then not embracing embracing the way things are moving now, which is large donors, small donors, just raising piles of money on off the books, I guess you'd say, not within the university, but to help somehow organize that or endorse it or encourage it, and expecting that you're going to do things sort of like the old way with new
Yeah.
rules, right? I mean, that's kind of feels like it. And
Yeah.
then I think the other part is, this you could almost argue it doesn't matter whether you're in the NIL era or not. The ability to engage and to satisfy these large donors, because these are people. The large ones are the ones who primarily move things. Buildings named after them, those sorts of things. They're at the functions. They're at special fundraisers, access to the coaches, coaching staff, and administrators. If you're not able to navigate that, and maybe it doesn't matter whether it's NIL era or not, you're going to have trouble being successful as an athletic director in any big time school. And I think maybe he spent, and you almost hate to say this, he spent too much time focusing on the performance of the athletic department, like
Yeah, and
the
that's worth
plus and minus and the
mentioning.
coaches, right?
That's worth mentioning because I think you can look at the job he's done in terms of hires
Right,
and looks pretty good, you know? Obviously, he made a hire in hockey that has been tremendous. It's brought
right.
Michigan State right back to the top of the heap nationally in very short order.
Mm-hmm.
What? I think this was Nightingale's third year.
Yeah, I mean
I
it's
think,
crazy. Like
and they
top
were number one for much of the season. They didn't win it,
and
but
last year too. I mean, yeah,
I
right.
think a national championship seems to be more or less a formality,
Mm-hmm.
assuming he stays here for a while. The women's basketball choice seems to be a good one with the potential
Yep.
to get better. So he's done some good things. I think I think though the other thing I'd want to mention before we move on to talk about the new AD is a big factor with that I don't think gets enough oxygen with for Haller that was totally out of his control uh, was donor fatigue around Mel Tucker.
Yeah,
If you
exactly.
remember, in the wake of that, I don't think the season was over, right? In 2021, when they had that great season, and there were rumors about LSU trying to poach him, and all
Right,
of a
right.
sudden Michigan State, entered into a crazy contract, and that was largely donor funded.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is Haller, and he was not the AD yet when that happened, that he was against it, and yet it happened anyway. And then we all know what occurred from there with
Right.
Mel Tucker's fall in shockingly quick order. But my understanding, and I, I'm not going to pretend that I circulate in the donor community per se. I do have met, and I do, let's say by proxy, I know very well a close relative of one of the major donors, Michigan State Athletics. So I've stayed in the guy's lake house. I've met him. My understanding of his position is he would be one of those guys for whom there was some fatigue
Yeah.
after the Mel Tucker thing. And that's the thing. You can't blame those people for feeling that way. They're like, I ponied up this money. What did I get for it? What are you
Right.
guys doing? And now you're asking for more? It's a reasonable, very human response, right? But that's got Allan Haller didn't create that situation, So I think that was one way in which there was a factor here that cut negatively for him that he had no responsibility for, but he had to wear it
Yeah.
because he's the guy in the job now, you know.
Yep. Yeah. So Michigan State's gonna wipe the slate clean, much like you can contact the Squeegee Squad at Grand Rapids, and they can wipe your windows clean. They can take care of them. This is a great time. Obviously, late spring, early summer. Get a hold of the Squeegee Squad at Grand Rapids. Troy and his team do fantastic work. They get on the ladder so you don't have to. They can power wash your home too. Get it all cleaned up for the summer to come. You can contact them at our website, our support page, tffinots.com/support. There you can find the link at the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. Reach out to them. You get 15% off as a listener of the show just by mentioning Final Four when you get your estimate. It's a very large region. It's not just not Grand Rapids. So if you're in the Grand Rapids adjacent, which is a lot of counties around Kent County, get a hold of them. Check it out. They can do any sort of window, whether it's your home, a business, high rise, even the state capitol. They can take care of it. So then that brings us to J Batt. So he's basically it's a lateral move in the sense that he's going from a Power Five school, Georgia Tech, to Michigan State. I'd say probably
That's
at
what
most
that's
levels
what
you'd say it's
that
not really it's
there you go.
lateral-ish because Michigan State's obviously a bigger program, bigger athletic department. It's got a higher profile, had more success both from football and basketball standpoint over the last however what do you want to measure it though, I suppose.
Yeah, I did see some Georgia Tech folks talking about it being a lateral move, and I no. I mean, it simply
What are they going
put,
to
no.
say? Of course
And
they're
and
yeah, sour grapes.
I don't even need to get into the track records of the football and basketball programs.
Right.
I don't even need to get into that. It's a very simple equation in 2025. If you are a member of the Big Ten or the SEC, that is not a lateral move from the Big
Right.
12 or the
Yeah.
ACC or the Big East in basketball or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not. Those two conferences. So I would say the same thing if J Batt had taken the Maryland job, which they apparently were very interested in him. He had worked there previously, and he turned them down. He didn't even interview, despite their interest. But if he had taken that job, I wouldn't have said, "Well, that's a lateral move."
Right.
You know, the the only ones North Carolina, certainly Duke in basketball, you wouldn't say that. There are very few exceptions, but athletic director, and it's also worth mentioning that supposedly there was interest from North Carolina's current athletic director in the MSU job. He's a native of Flint, Bubba
Okay.
Cunningham, but that supposedly the deal there was his wife really didn't want to move. At least that's what I've heard. That he was actually interested in the job just as a job. Because obviously, for those who don't know, and I would imagine that's not very many of you, the current president at Michigan State was president at North Carolina before he took
Right.
the MSU job. So, and by the way, J Batt played soccer at North Carolina. He was a goalie. So he knew the president. There was a story I listened to today on a podcast. It's the first interview he's done. It was with an MSU podcast, MSU produced podcast, where he talked about the first time he met Michigan State's president was he was in a some type of concussion study, and he was the subject as a soccer player. So he's known him a long time.
Sometimes small circles that people travel in here, it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting. So they bring him in from Georgia Tech. I mean, so what is it that attracted him to the Michigan State job aside from just being bigger profile, do you think? And then what attracted Michigan State to him?
Well, again, listening to him on that podcast, the way he phrased it was, "This is a top 10 athletics job," and people can debate that, but what I don't think there's much debate about is Michigan State, when it is humming at full capacity, is absolutely an upper tier college athletics job.
Right.
There's no debating that. You can debate where it sits exactly, but you can't debate that it's comfortably in the upper half of the Big Ten and SEC, which really are that's those whatever it is now, 34 schools, I guess,
Yeah,
between the
something
two
like that.
conferences.
Yeah.
That's your top 34 or 35. And so Michigan State, I think, pretty clearly resides in the top half of that group in most circumstances. So that's what has appealed to him. I think when you see the potential, let's not forget. It's not that long ago that Michigan State had a stretch of probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years when D'Antonio won at least 11 games a year, I think 3 different times.
Yep.
Tom Izzo during that same stretch, I think, went to two Final Fours. I mean, there was the year in 2015 where Michigan State simultaneously went to the college football playoff when it was only 4 teams
Hmm.
and
Yep.
the Final Four in basketball in the same year. That's rare company. So when
Yeah,
you
right.
look at it, so for a lot of us, I think we're too close to it. That you and especially because of the circumstances where you're dealing with a state which you share with Michigan,
Hmm.
and that has an impact, I think, on the way even a lot of Michigan State people view the athletic department and its potential that maybe people from the outside don't share. They see
Yeah.
something different, they see something bigger or potentially bigger. And that sounds like that's the way J Batt perceives it, that this is a job that can truly be an elite level position. And I think that's why he was interested. It's an opportunity to get into the big leagues, and there aren't too many of those.
No,
He's
no, that's true.
again, as I mentioned, he turned down Maryland. He reportedly last year, South Carolina wanted him, which is an SEC job, and he turned them down. So he's had opportunities to even at other places to move into the Big Ten or SEC and passed on those. He didn't pass on this one. And so that says
Yeah,
something
no,
about the attractiveness of the job.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think there's no question. And another quick live read. What else is you need elite levels of gutters too for your house. We're getting ready for a big rainstorm tomorrow. Make sure you have everything properly function in your house or your business. Make sure that things are clear of debris, whether it's downspouts or just the gutters themselves. Maybe you need some leaf guards. Contact the Brothers Adjust Your Gutters. They are elite when it comes to this. They get on the ladders. They take care of all that stuff so you don't have to. They took care of my gutters. They took care of Rod's gutters. They've taken care of a lot of people. They've emailed in and said they do great work. So we feel no hesitation endorsing the Brothers Adjust Your Gutters and their work. You get the nice thing is too, you get 10% off as a listener to the show to any gutter work you an estimate. You can find that ad, of course, our support page, whether you're on the east side or the west side of the state at tffinots.com/support. And so, I guess the obvious thing he would come to fix, I guess you'd say, is the things that Haller could do. I mean, I always feel like,
Yep,
whenever you hire someone, whatever the deficiency was of the first person, you tend to make sure that that's the thing that you got covered. Now, you
that's
may
right.
find that find a new deficiency. There's a new, weakness that someone has that was a strength of the previous person, but at least you're trying to fix the problem from before. And I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like pretty clearly it was a funding, donor relations, et cetera
Yeah.
issue. And can he navigate that? And sort of, what did he do at Georgia Tech that gives people
Well,
encouragement that it's going to work here at Michigan State?
yeah, he was apparently, and I don't have all the details in front of me, but I know he's been involved in just tremendous fundraising in the short time, whatever it is, 3 years.
Three,
He's been
four
at
years, yeah,
Georgia
three
Tech.
years, yeah.
He was also heavily involved in fundraising at Alabama when he was, I believe he was an assistant AD at Alabama. Um, he's come up apparently in the collegiate athletics world primarily on the fundraising side. So
Mm-hmm.
you're absolutely right. This exactly hits what the perceived failing was of the previous regime. And I don't think anybody can argue whatever you think about how that went down and the reasons for it. This is something that whomever was going to be in that job, even if it was still Allan Haller, it had to improve
Yeah,
dramatically,
right.
right? So he seems very well suited to that. Uh, Michigan State, I think, is in an interesting position. You hear a lot of talk about wanting to and needing to modernize Spartan Stadium, that there are moves that could be made. And look, college facilities for the major sports, especially, this is a constant arms race. It's a constant keeping up with the Joneses thing. I
Uh-huh.
don't personally think Spartan Stadium is a ruin by any stretch, but is there a sense that maybe Michigan State is falling behind what some other schools are doing in that area? Yeah, there is. Basketball is a different story. I think basketball sits in a pretty good spot. Now, five
Yeah.
years from now, is it going to be something that they need to do to keep up with the Joneses? Yeah, probably. But for now, I think they're in good shape from that perspective. But football maybe has more needs, and they've done some things like they have that the Tom Izzo locker room.
Yeah,
Uh,
right. Mm-hmm.
yeah, so they've done some things with football, but with Spartan Stadium in particular, I guess it would not be surprising if we see, to me at least, if we see some kind of targeted fundraising effort very quickly to do some things once they decide what it is exactly they want to do with Spartan Stadium to make it a more enjoyable experience for fans and more attractive and all of those things. So that's something I would expect. But the other thing is Georgia Tech football apparently has had its best class in at least the last like 25 years. And it's understood that a large part of that has to do with the financial resources that they've had
Right.
available.
Right.
So, you know, this is the thing. I do want to say this. I I was told by someone who was at a a meeting recently, and I believe this was with the donor class, we'll call them, where Tom Izzo and Jonathan Smith were both present. And both of those guys were talking about a variety of things that are going on. There's a need to raise a good amount of money, low seven figures, just to cover NIL promises. And I would
Sure.
imagine most of that is football related. Before
Hmm.
we get to the July 1 to the revenue share, which who the hell knows what happens with that. Um, but the other thing that was said, both of this person who told me about it emphasized this. They said both guys, three or four different times, said and just kept reiterating, we're not here to waste your money.
Right.
Meaning, and I know this is the case with Izzo, and I perceive it to be the case with Jonathan Smith as well. I don't think either of the, if you as a fan are wanting a coach who's going to go out there and essentially trumpet the fact that, hey, we're going to pay whatever it takes, man, you got the wrong guys. I don't
Right.
think those guys, the sense I have is those guys are not comfortable with that. They don't like it. They're not going to engage in it. Now, what can you do systemically around them, particularly again in football? Because I do think it's different with basketball. But in football, what can you do that allows Michigan State to be as competitive as it wants and needs to be without putting Jonathan Smith in used car dealer mode? That remains to be seen. Clearly, there was a success story that J Batt was involved with at Georgia Tech on
Right.
that front. That seems pretty obvious. How do they do it at Michigan State? That remains to be seen. But I do expect there's going to be more done. And I mean, there's just going to be a host of ways. One of the things that people have talked about that I think probably we should expect is going to happen, there's probably going to be some naming rights stuff for
Right.
facilities, for stadiums or arenas that goes on. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the modern world. We don't have to like it, but you got to acknowledge that you're in this environment and you got to play if you want to win. So that's going to be interesting to me, though, to see how all of this fits together because I think the guys who are running the two major programs are just not the kind of guys that want to be out there um, throwing around bags, legal or no.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I'm sure if anyone, the happiest person right now for bad coming on is Izzo, who no longer has the assistant AD tag. I'm sure it's something he doesn't really want.
You know what's
But
funny about that though? I do want to stop you there for a second.
sure.
Is that's been, my perception is that God, I just can't imagine Tom Izzo would embrace, having to be the chief fundraiser and constantly be asking to get into people's wallets. And that just seems like anathema to him, which is what I've been talking about, right? But there is another perspective on this, one thing for sure is I believe J Batt has done nothing in his career to suggest that he's not great at his job, at that aspect of his job for sure. He's done it at several places and it's his background. So you would
Yeah.
expect he'd be really good at it. But I would submit that he can be no better than the second best guy from the perspective of having people being willing to listen to him and support him when he's asking for support, he's no better than the second best guy on campus. And we all know who the
Yeah,
first guy is. He just,
sure.
I don't think he wants to do that. But Jim Comparoni at Spartan Mag maybe disagrees with that a little bit. I've gotten the sense that Jim believes Izzo really likes some aspect. One thing we know is because he's a people person, and I believe this, he genuinely does love, interacting with donors. He likes that aspect of
Yes.
the
I
social
think
aspect
it's
of
the
it.
ask that might be different. And that's
Right.
different.
It's
Yeah.
the, hey, can you cut me a check for $3 million so I can go sign PJ Haggerty to go 7 for 25 in an Elite Eight game for me? It's that part that he struggles with. But
Well, and
but
that's where you need
but
your
he's
Robin,
also
right?
the one guy who could, above and beyond anybody else, could, and that's not even limited to Michigan State's campus. I would argue Tom Izzo is probably one of the best people in the whole country in that respect. Could be if he wanted to be, but I don't think he does. Um, Jonathan Smith, on the other hand, I don't have the impression that he likes much of that at all. I think he wants to coach football. You
Yeah,
know,
right. I think that
kind of
that
like
seems to be my impression too.
yeah, I didn't get the impression that Mark D'Antonio reveled
Nope.
in that.
I think they're comfortable letting Izzo do it, and that's what I think. The Izzo is the he needs a Robin. He needs a guy who's behind him, who's like, okay, you just met Coach Izzo. Let's get the money, right? And so you need someone else to make the ask, and he's the one who kind of lays the table. And I think
Maybe.
I think when it comes, and you mentioned earlier, I think value, and this is something I think fans don't recognize, and I don't pretend to live amongst the high rollers. I've met a few of them. What they want is they want access for sure. That's one of the number one things they
100%.
right. They want access,
Yeah.
but they do want tangible results. They want value for what they give. And yeah, $1 million may not be much to someone who's worth $1 billion, and that's absolutely true. They can cut a check and not really think about it. But cutting 50 checks for $1 million over the next 2 years, when you don't feel perceive that there's anything coming from it, is really hard. And so I think people can kind of say, Michigan State should throw money around. They've all these donors. There's no reason they can't compete. And they complain about Izzo, judiciously spending money, or maybe people call him chintzy or cheap or whatever. But he also recognizes that these people are not made of, they don't have infinite amounts of money, certainly to give to a school, a place where they truly get nothing out of it except just access, right? You're not really getting anything else. If Michigan State wins or loses, these people don't make more money, right? They don't get anything, maybe the better seats for, a more important game, but essentially there's nothing they're getting out of it except the satisfaction that their school's winning and that they were a part of that, which is why you want to have the access, right? So you can be a part of that process. You can't
Yeah.
actually play, but you can be part of the program in some respects. But you have to perceive some value, that you're just not just handing over money and you're just an ATM. People don't like being treated that way. Even people who are rich, right? Even though they have the money, they don't like being treated that way. And so I think people just sort of glibly think, well, someone's worth $1 zillion, they can just give all the money, and they want to have some sort of perception there's something they're getting for it and not just access. And so anyway, I think it's important that Izzo, the way he is, maintains it so he's always got the money should he need it for some reason. And yes, he's not using, pulling out $10 million to get the hottest player of the week. He could do it if he had to, but it's only because of the way he operates. And so I think people need to recognize that you need to
And
get the
that and
value.
that's something that we should touch on here because I said I think it really matters, this stuff in football, for sure.
Right.
You
Hmm.
you've seen noticeable impact for Michigan State negatively in terms
Right.
of the available resources, right? That's not been the case in basketball. I mean, even, contrary to what, we were initially told about Trey Holloman, it does seem, with a lot of time now, almost 2 months to digest it all, it does seem that the primary thing for him was really the opportunity to be the starting point guard
Yeah. The
somewhere,
role. Yeah.
as opposed to the money. Michigan, I heard a number um, the other day for what Michigan State's NIL offer was to Trey, and it was substantial. It wasn't quite, this some of the crazy stuff you've heard from some other guys, but it was very competitive. We also, Jack Ebling, I talked to, I was on his show last week, and Jack let slip, and you can guess, and I'll give you three, and the first two don't count, as to who told him this. But Michigan State, apparently this coming season, basketball program's NIL budget is going to be 3 times what it was last year. So they're spending money.
Yeah.
And as of yet, I do not believe there's a circumstance where they've lost anybody due to NIL.
Yeah. At least
That
in
hasn't
basketball.
happened
Right.
yet.
Exactly.
Not to
Yeah.
my knowledge.
Yep.
The guys who have left, it was for other reasons. A Holloman, it was that, Book, it was kind of, understanding that a change of scenery was for the best.
Yeah.
Got AJ
And
Hogard, same thing
Norman.
the year
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
before, on and on and on. But I'll say this. I don't expect, I could be wrong, but I don't expect Michigan State basketball situation to change very much. And that's even if J Batt is knocking it out of the park in terms of his fundraising. Because I don't think with Tom Izzo, that would suggest that he hasn't spent because the money wasn't there. And I don't
Exactly.
believe that.
Right. Yeah.
I don't
No, I
believe
agree.
that. As I say, Tom Izzo's the one guy on that campus that I think if he said, guys, I need a $10 million war chest, he'd get it.
Yep.
I think he'd get it. I can't prove that, but I think he'd get it.
Yeah. No, I
He's
think you're
not
right.
asking for that. And I don't think he's ever going to ask for that.
Well,
And I don't
until
think
inflated
I don't
prices.
think,
Yeah. Right.
I don't think, what's that?
Until prices becoming more inflated. But yeah, you're right. I know what
Okay.
you're saying.
But
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So I don't expect it to change very much for the basketball program. What does that mean? Well, in my opinion, what it means is for the most part, you are not going to see Michigan State participate in any of these mega bucks bidding wars.
Right.
They're not going to get involved with that. It's not because the money's not there, though. It's because, so for example, I'll go back to an example that I think I've touched on here before. I was
Yeah.
told that there was a very earlier in the portal, there was a very hot, highly desired player in the portal, a guard who had never played high major. He'd been a mid major player his whole career, and he was on the market. And Michigan State had a phone call with him, and it got fairly quickly. It got to, well, what's it going to take financially? And he said $3 million, and they said, okay, great talking to you. And that was it.
Yeah.
Now, I think the bulk of the reason for that is Tom Izzo looks at it and says, am I going to pay $3 million for a guy who might be my third best player?
Right. Exactly.
Because that's real.
Yeah.
I look at this kid. Now, we're going to see. He landed in another very good high major program, and it's anticipated that he'll start. Be interesting to me how good he is.
Sure.
But I think there's every chance that had he come to Michigan State, he would have been no better than their third best player.
Well, and
Every chance.
let's just say, had Jace Richardson decided to come back and say, the difference, I just need 3 million to kind of, that's really the difference. That money would have been
Right.
there. Right.
And the other exception I could see is if, let's say you had a situation like a Jabari Parker, to throw it way back.
Sure.
Michigan State recruits him out of high school. They're all in. They just don't get him. He goes somewhere else. And after the first year, he decides he still wants to stay in college basketball, but he wants to transfer and he wants to come to Michigan State. That kind of situation, I could see Michigan State getting into a big dollar. If it was somebody that he was convinced is worth that. And again, his evaluation of worth is different than yours or mine or anyone out there listening to this.
Exactly.
It is singular. But what you better understand is that singular valuation is the only one on the face of the earth that matters when it comes to what Michigan State basketball is going to do. Yeah. That's it. So he has to perceive that it's worth it. I don't think we're going to see Michigan State, as I say, get into a lot of these big dollar bidding war type circumstances. Uh, I think that the
Yep.
cost of just keeping your own guys continues to go up. And that's where I think they've been pretty effective. You'd have to say so. I mean, there's yet to be Trey Holloman's the first guy I can think of who they really wanted to have come back who didn't, and it wasn't because of a bidding war in the end. It was
Yeah.
much more
Right.
about the role. And there's just nothing they could do about that.
Well, if you want something high quality and you don't want to pay through the nose for it, there's no better place than Nudge Printing. Nudge Printing gets the best stuff, and you actually feel like you're getting a great deal. I've got some on right now. I've got my logo T-shirt for Final Four's Not the Schedule. They're sweet, super comfortable. You head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. If you want to get our stuff, you can go to nudgeprinting.com/TFFINOTS. There you can get a pretty good selection of things. They have a obviously much bigger selection of Spartan apparel in general. You may not be J Batt. You may actually have to go buy your own stuff, but there's no better place to go than Nudge Printing. Gabe and his wife Brittany run a great store right out of Portland, Michigan. They ship it to you wherever you need to go, wherever it needs to go. You can head on over there and get 20% off as a listener to the show by just typing Final Four as one word in the checkout. You won't regret it. You'll be very happy with your product. I guarantee it. So the other big scuttlebutt with J Batt is, well, hey, this guy was an assistant AD at Alabama.
It was assistant AD.
Izzo's right, assistant AD, right? Yeah. Yeah. He helped hire Nate Oates.
That's
Tom
right.
Izzo, I don't know, but let's say his 5, 10 years. I don't know how long the athletic directors last. It's usually not super long, but it's not unreasonable to think that he may be the guy making the next basketball hire. Wouldn't it be convenient for him just to call Nate up on the phone? Yeah, he's probably got him, on speed dial. He just go, hey Nate, come on up to
Mhm.
East Lansing. What do you think?
Um,
People
well,
are talking about it, right?
the first error there is, and I know you're not saying this, you're encapsulating a school of thought. The first mistake in that is saying, well, Jay Batt's going to be the guy to hire the next coach. Technically, that's true, I suppose, if he's still the AD. But as we've talked about more than once here, the reality is the next Michigan State basketball coach, absent something catastrophic, is
Right.
going to be hired in essence by Tom Izzo. And it's just like it went Villanova with Jay Wright, at Duke with Coach K, at North Carolina with Roy Williams. If you understand that Tom Izzo is a peer of those guys, and he is, why would you think it will be any different at Michigan State? In fact, I would argue that K might get into the same realm, but there's no coach in the last quarter century other than maybe K who was as significant to his university and his community as Tom Izzo has been at Michigan State.
Right.
Put another way, J Batt is in this job because Tom Izzo okayed it. He wasn't the only guy. I'm
Right.
not
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
he was the driver entirely of that decision, but he was one of those voices in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So what I don't know what people think. I had somebody say today the $1.8 million AD is going to have a say. Eh, let's put it this way. I think there's a reasonably good chance that there will be alignment between him, assuming he's still the AD here, and Tom Izzo when that time
Yeah.
comes. And thus, we won't be talking about any kind of problem. But
Right.
if there were to be a difference of opinion over that, I know who I'm betting to win that one. Um, all of that is to say the Nate Oates stuff. Come on, I said this on the Spartan Mag board today that Nate Oates, you would think that he was born in Jennison Fieldhouse and had grown. This guy is from Wisconsin.
He's been to Michigan, right?
He was born in Wisconsin. He grew
Yeah.
up in Wisconsin. He went to college in Wisconsin. Then he did happen to coach Romulus High School for 11 years. And then he left to go be an assistant at Buffalo to Bobby Hurley, and then he eventually became the head coach there, and now he's the head coach at Alabama.
Right.
That's it. There's no connection to Michigan State at all. So I don't understand it. I never have. That's even assuming that he would be the guy that Tom Izzo would want to succeed him. I don't think that's true. And let's just say that is let's call that an educated guess.
Yeah.
So I understand if people look at it, they get all excited. Not happening, man. For apart from all of that, by the way, Nate Oates would have to want to leave his job. Why would he want to do that? He is in a Power 2 conference job where it's
Yep.
clearly been demonstrated he has enough resources to be able to compete nationally. He can realistically compete for national titles at Alabama. We'll see whether he ever wins one. But he can be in the mix in that job. He's not lacking anything. So short of Alabama hiring a new AD or a president that he doesn't get along with, where is the motivation for him to leave for another college job? I don't get it.
I, yeah.
I mean,
He's just
yeah,
he's a high
it's
profile coach that everyone
no, I
gets,
know why.
you
It's
know,
that. It's
yeah.
he coached high school basketball in Michigan for 11 years and he's high profile. So that's the guy we want because that's all apart from the fact that, I'm just speaking personally here. This has no bearing on anything except my own enjoyment. I wouldn't be a fan of a Nate Oates hire
Yeah.
personally. He wins, but I don't like the aesthetics of the way his teams play. I just don't. I understand his rationale and the way he views the analytical conclusions,
Right.
but I don't like the way it looks. I don't like the way it feels. I don't like the way it functions. I think it's bad for the sport. That's my opinion. Um, and I also think that, and this is something that I think some of our listeners, at least, who have been around for a while, will appreciate. I think Michigan State's basketball program really over the last 50 years, because I think you have to also include Judd's tenure before that,
Mm-hmm.
um, has kind of stood for some things that don't necessarily have anything to do with winning or losing basketball games. But
Right.
over the course of all those years, I've kind of grown fond of them, of the school that I went to and its basketball program kind of standing for these things. And I don't think Nate Oates is that guy.
Yeah.
So I think
Well,
my opinion is you can safely put that to bed. It's not going to stop people from speculating because that's the world we live in. But I just don't see it for a host of
yeah.
reasons. I don't see it.
And I always think at this point we're so far out, and by so far out we could be like 3 years out, that
Yeah.
it's not even worth even considering or thinking about these things, because the flavor of the day 3 years from now is going to be very different than what it is today. I mean, I think
I
there's little
would,
doubt
I
about
would,
that.
I would say this. I think that absent his leaving for an NBA job, I think that if Nate Oates is in that job, no matter whether it comes 3 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever it is, um, he'll very, very likely be it. We're not talking about a hot mid-major coach.
Yeah.
He's
Right.
done it enough years that at Alabama that I think he's going to be a name that some people are going to clamor for no matter what. So I don't think that's going to fade away. You're of course right about other guys who might not even be on anybody's radar right now, but would be at the time that a decision actually needs to be made.
Yeah. So
So
we'll leave
anyway,
that speculation for the future,
yeah,
the distant future, hopefully, far distant future.
that's right.
So hopefully everyone's enjoying their summer. I finally got my haircut, which was huge. I've lost about 2 pounds of hair, which I was supposed to get before my trip to Europe. So anyway, I feel much better. Hopefully you make sure you get everything taken care of at home, whether it's your gutters, whether it's your windows, or if you just need to get some new Spartan apparel. Head on over to our support page at finalfoursontheschedule.com/support. You find all our great sponsors there. And so until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.